thing on. Hey. We are in Exodus chapter 14. And the Bible study author has a question for us right out the gate. I don't know his illustration for me. Brother Junior might. But his question is, what movie do you remember profoundly impressing you with its special effects? And I would have to think, because a lot of movies nowadays have special effects. They have all kinds of computer generated in illustrations. I can't remember what CGI stands for. Yeah, computer generated illustrations. And even back in the day, when they were making movies, the even the cartoons, when they would illustrate, it was a bunch of still images, right? It's a bunch of pictures. That's the way video is done, anyways. When you really learn and you get down in depths of technology, I guess, I don't know, equipment, video equipment. It takes a bunch of pictures and then stitches them together, and that's the way cartoons. They're some are illustrated, but then some have like a couple base images that they stick together, and then we had a Christmas movie that a lot of, well, I know my wife enjoys a lot, and it requires a lot of makeup. It requires a lot of stuff to go into it, but it's special effects, right? And there's just so many movies that use that nowadays. There's not a whole lot of movies that just take the video camera, put it on people, and tell a story, because it needs to be our appetite for I don't know what you call it, intensity maybe, has grown as a population. But here in the illustration that the Bible study author provides says Alfred Hitchcock was a master of suspense and was known for his groundbreaking special effects. Groundbreaking special effects. And what I'm getting ready to describe to you is not groundbreaking at all. But we see it in the older, not older, but recent, more than what was here back, the 90s, the late 80s, the early 2000s. They had a slew of what they called sitcoms, situational comedies or something like that. Can't remember exactly what it stood for, but sitcoms. And to film some of those scenes, they would use this technique here. It says one of his better known effects was in the movie Foreign Correspondent. He sent a camera ever closer to the surface of the ocean. Then he rear projected that ocean scene onto a screen in a room set up like a cockpit. The effect gave the illusion the plane had crashed into the ocean, right? And so, if you kind of think about it, they went and they took a picture and then built a big screen and then had a cockpit, like built props, and then as they were filming it, they had the screen projected or the ocean projected in the background, and that's what we do here today. Something like it. We take it a little step further and then have a recording studio set up, and we take out all the background, and then it looks like Junior's sitting by a fire, or Junior's sitting with Bigfoot. Those types of things, right? And while that might be that might have been impressive when they first did it, and the situational the sitcoms, if they're in a taxi, if they're in a car, if they're in a plane, that kind of deal, right? It might be cool then, but today, to see wholly computer generated. I wouldn't say people, but uh, characters. Um, and laid up against a real the backdrop of a scene that might not be um, real, or if it is real, right, it might not be that exact time of day when they're setting it or when they're filming it and all that type of stuff. It's pretty neat. And I have to go back and think about Avatar, the way they did all of those types of deals to make, like, I think they were like 10 foot. What they're supposed to be like 10 foot characters, and then to simulate that they're like in a machine that uses their mind to project the was it life, their essence, their soul essence into another body, right? And then the world that they built, that they were looking at, and how cool it looked and similar to Earth's properties and all that. It was a pretty cool movie, and I have to think about that as something that would uh, profoundly impress me with special effects. It says, "What were the special effects, and what did you feel when seeing it?" When I first seen Avatar, I think I seen it in IMAX, and so it was even bigger than real life. What IMAX tries to bring you, um, but it was pretty neat seeing how uh, none of that. Some of the so when the humans were a part of the scene, right? Those sets were very very small because they put them in a huge CGI world, and so to see that and how far we had come with all the animation and graphics and all that, it was pretty neat. And I just remember thinking, what would it me I thought about what it would be like visiting another world, and for this plot, I'm hoping I'm not spoiling it for anybody, but try to take over that planet, right, and try to take its resources. I'm not sure if they were sending them back to Earth or how that was working. I can't remember the entire plot, but what it would actually be like, and if it would actually be that. To me, it was neat to see that world. Um, but what were if you guys are watching online and want to comment, what's some of the movies that you remember, and maybe we have some elders that seen some of that stuff. Maybe even the illustration here when um, those special effects were used, green screens and all that when they were first come apart. There's a movie or like a show that was running that really used a lot of green screen stuff, and I can't remember the name of it. Um, but moving on, it says, after the night of wailing, when the Lord struck the firstborn sons of Egypt, Pharaoh ordered the Israelites to leave the land immediately. So in the wee hours, the Lord led Israel and a mixed crowd to take all they had, including their plunder, and the plunder is in quotes, to Sukkoth. There, the Lord gave further instructions through Moses regarding the Passover celebration and the concentration of all of Israel's firstborn. This was all to help Israel remember when the Lord brought us out of Egypt by the strength of his hand. Then the Lord led Israel from Sukkah to Baal Zephon by the Red Sea, guiding them by his pillar of cloud and pillar of fire, which never left them. And those are important things to remember. By the sea, God warned Moses that he would cause Pharaoh to harden his heart and pursue Israel so that the Lord's glory would be revealed and the Egyptians would know that he alone is God. That, of course, is exactly what happened. And we can read a little bit. Um, remember, we read the instructions for the Passover, and then what was going to happen. He gave them more instructions, and this is the actual Passover. It says, the time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that same day, all the Lord's divisions went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night of vigil in honor of the Lord, because he would bring them out of the land of Egypt. This same night is in honor of the Lord, a night vigil for all the Israelites throughout their generations. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the statute of the Passover. No foreigner may eat it, but any slave a man has purchased may eat it after you have circumcised him. A temporary resident or hired hand may not eat the Passover. It is to be eaten in one house. You may not take any of the meat outside the house, and you may not break any of its bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it." And he goes on, he continues with more instructions. And he goes, it says, "The same law will apply to both the native and the foreigner who resides among you." Then all the Israelites did this. They did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. On that same day, the Lord brought out the Israelites out of the land according to their divisions, out of the land Egypt according to their divisions. And then the instructions for the firstborn male. It says, "Remember this day," skipping a little bit further. He says, "Remember this day when you came out of Egypt, out of the place of slavery, for the Lord brought you out of here by the strength of his hand. Nothing leavened may be eaten. Today in the month of Abib, you are leaving." And then he goes on, he details their journey. Skipping on to 14, it says, "In the future, when your son asks you, 'What does this mean?' say to him, 'By the strength of his hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn man of man to the firstborn of livestock. That is why I sacrificed to the Lord all the firstborn of the womb that are males, but I redeemed all the firstborn of my sons. So let it be a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead, for the Lord brought us out of Egypt by the strength of his hand." Again, talking about how they should remember what he has done for them. And then explaining to them what's about to happen. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them along the road of to the land of the Philistines, even though it was nearby. For God said, "The people will change their minds and return to Egypt if they face war." Right. He knew what was best for them. He was guiding them on the path that he wanted them to ensure not only their safety, but strengthen their faith. And they knew he was at a time where he knew that the people was at a time where they were fragile, and if they seen certain things, right, they might be tempted to break their newfound commitment. And it's like that for a lot of us. This is giving us a glimpse of the struggles and the path that we will experience if we haven't already experienced as a new Christian, the path that he sets us on, right? He gets us education, he gets us people, he surrounds us with people. But there are some times when we want to return back to those old ways. We have a struggle to put aside those things that we're familiar with and to take up those things that we're unfamiliar with that are better for us. And in the same way, his people were in that same state. In fact, there was a point when when his people, even though he rescued them, and we're going to see a demonstration of power, that they weren't as committed as he wanted them, as he knew they could be, right? And so he had to not wipe out his people, but he had to clear the way with a whole generation. And again, there's a remarkable similarity to our walk with him as well in this current time. We might not see everything that we want to see because we've come to the Lord, right? But it's those generations coming up. And I always like that because there's not too many cultures out there, people groups, whatever you want to call them, that look ahead that far. And the natives, us Native Americans, American Indians, whatever you want to say, however you want to title us, the tribal people, we do that. Um, Jesus and his disciples and all his people were tribal people, and they looked ahead. They wanted to make it better for the generations coming up. Um, the saying goes, right. Seven is a godly number, and we had that same mentality in the American Indian. We were looking 7 generations ahead to whatever we did now would impact those people, those sons and daughters coming up. And if it wasn't good for us then, it wouldn't be good for them now or in the future. And even though it might have been best for us, what we were working towards, right? We might not see it, but we had the satisfaction of knowing that what we were working towards, our sons and our daughters would be able to work towards. Our grandsons and our granddaughters, and on until that 7th generation was able to see it, right? Um, So he led the people around toward the Red Sea along the road of the wilderness. And the Israelites left the land of Egypt in battle formation. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear a solemn oath, saying, God will certainly come to your aid. Then you must take my bones with you from this place. And then moving on again, talking about what the Bible study author was talking about here. They weren't off scot-free, even though they said to leave immediately, and it wasn't a nice how you say it, parting. It was a disgust. It's like, get out of here, go on. And you could kind of see that already kind of seething, right? It might have been shock that he didn't immediately go out and try to kill them. He had to take care of things. He was grieving, and the Lord knew all this, right? And so there was a time. If they had waited around, if they had not left right away, we see what Pharaoh would have done, because he was already in that moment. He was already vulnerable to the evil, and those situations are again, there's similarities right here to our walk, right? Don't wallow in certain things, because then that's when bad things will happen, right? And so when you're told, when the Israelites were told to leave, they left. They didn't piddle around, right? They left what they didn't need, which was a lot. They only took what they were instructed to take, and so that's a key part, right? When Yeah, right. But when somebody comes to know the Lord, when somebody's maybe they even know the Lord, they're in a situation where they need help, they need rescue, they need intervention, right? And when they pray and when God answers, he instructs them or takes them out of that situation, they're not to return. They're not to um, piddle. Well, that's all you can think. What's be lazy about it, right? They're not. Huh? Yeah, sloth. It's a heavy term, but it's right, because yeah, you might be headed towards that, right? You might be headed towards that goal, but you might be taking your time. That's not what the Israelites. If the Israelites had took their time, if they said, well, did he really mean, nighttime? It's not night. We can barely see. If they would have lagged they would have been dealt with by Pharaoh, because he had the Bible study author said it. He had hardened his heart so much that he turned against his own, what his was people, right? There were slaves, they were workers, they were part of his population. But he was going to rebel. He was going to take it out on them. What he was feeling in his own heart, what he's seen, right? And he was the cause of it, because he was presented with God. He was given an option whether or not to get on the boat, or be cast away in the sea, basically. And he chose the sea. He chose the bad route. It says the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites who were going out triumphantly. Um, Now, the ones who were finally glad, right, were God's answering our prayers. They were hopeful. They were ecstatic. Um, Again, those ones that were lagging behind, or didn't take him seriously, they were dealt with. But it was a joyous time, and that probably made Pharaoh even more vengeful when he seen that their cries for help were answered, and he wasn't the one providing the assistance. Not only he dealt a major blow in that an entire generation was wiped out, but he was like, well, now these guys are happy about it. They were happy that God rescued them, not that they dealt with Pharaoh's people or in Egypt in that kind of way. They didn't have any control over it, but they were glad that God had answered their prayers, but Pharaoh took notice of that. Um, the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his horsemen and his army, chased after them and caught up with them as they camped by the sea beside Pi Hiroth in front of Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up and saw the Egyptians coming after them. Then the Israelites were terrified and cried out to the Lord for help. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you took us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt?" And this is rebellion against Moses, right? They're not fully committed. You can see what God is doing here. They're thinking that Moses is God. They're thinking that everything relies on him. They're not fully committed yet to the idea that their Lord, yeah, that he's a messenger, that their Lord is actually the one doing all this. And so they're questioning Moses, because we always have to, something goes wrong 99% of the time, we want to blame somebody. We want to throw that on somebody else. We don't want to take responsibility. And that's exactly what the people here are doing. They're saying, why in the world? Then they see the army. They get a little bit scared because they didn't take any weapons. They didn't take any procurements to go to battle, right? They were they were being joyous, and they see the army coming, and then immediately they're like, Moses, why are we doing this? And they knew all the experience that just happened, right? So all the death and destruction that took place with the Passover, and they're not ironic. What's that? Sarcastic. They're sarcastic in that they're saying, "Oh, because they have to deal with all that back there, you wanted us to come out here and die." Uh, isn't this what you told? Isn't this what you told? What we told you in Egypt? Leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians. They wanted to go back to where they were comfortable, right? They were crying out for help. And I guess on a certain level, you have to describe what you're comfortable with, right? They didn't like their situation, and we have to think about this as it applies to us today. They might have not enjoyed their situation, but they didn't want to pursue anything else, right? And God is not testing them, but he's providing a better way for them to be able to come back to him instead of going astray and uh, having their faith in false gods and things that weren't real. That's hard for maybe somebody that's new to the faith to understand. But when you don't know, when you haven't had that salvation experience, correct me if I'm wrong. If you haven't had that salvation experience, you probably doubt that God really exists, right? And I say probably and all that because I don't know. I'm not in that population anymore. But you might struggle with the idea that something you can't see is actually there for you, loves you, provides for you, right? But when you're on this side, you know that he's real, even though you can't see him, touch him, taste him, all that type of stuff. Well, taste. I mean, he provides some pretty great food out there. he provides he provides food through really really great cooks. So sometimes you get to taste a little bit of heaven. But that's the thing is, the Israelites are at that point. They're at that point right now where he's providing a way for them to not be comfortable, but it's a little bit displeasing, I guess, to the physical self because they're scared they might die. They're scared that they gave up something for nothing, right? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the Lord's salvation. He will provide for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You must be quiet." The Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to break camp." Uh, yeah. Tell the Israelites to break camp. As for you, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. Um, they were pinned up, uh, facing what was also almost likely certain death by the hand of the Egyptians. But they also couldn't go anywhere else because they had gotten to a point where they were pinned against the sea. But that's the escape route that God was going to provide for them. It wasn't clear and obvious at the time. It was going to take a little bit of the term magic is a little bit it doesn't cover it. Miracle, we don't see too many of those often, but it's kind of at a it's a word that it's a miracle. So people use that, yeah, people use that word and don't really understand, right? What Moses and Aaron understood was that God was going to rescue them. What the Israelites didn't understand was how that was going to happen. They had been told this, and even you can see the sarcastic remark is like, "Well, why'd you bring us out here to what's going to really happen?" But that's the reason that this is all culminating at this spot right here, for God to show and reveal His power. I'm going to harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will receive glory by means of Pharaoh, all of his army, and his chariots and horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh when I receive glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God, who was going in front of the Israelite forces, moved and went behind them. The pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and stood behind them. It came between the Egyptian and Israelite forces. The cloud was there in the darkness, yet it lit up at night. So neither group came near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back with a powerful east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with the waters like a wall to them on their right and their left. And there's a couple good illustrations, I guess you call it. There's cartoons. There's I can't remember in the uh what's that one movie? Isn't there a movie that kind of is it Ten Commandments? Yeah, where they yeah, but it's yeah, okay, that's one. Okay, and so what's being described here is only described here in the Bible. What actually happened, and probably the testimonies there were with that generation, right? You guys understand, right? That generation went to perish in the wild because they didn't want to fully commit. They didn't want to believe what they seen with their own eyes, right? So we can't really have a demonstration of it. More so, um, that was probably a miracle. We as humans, we're only going to see one time because um, the Egyptians were white. You're going to see. You're going to here in the next couple of verses. You're going to see where how God was going to deal with the Egyptians and that vengeful attitude that well, I'm gonna take my anger out on these people that don't even deserve it because they weren't necessarily the ones responsible for it. And again, might be hard to explain, but it wasn't the Egyptians and the Israelites. This wasn't a battle between God was intervening on their behalf, and what was happening was they were getting mad at each other, but for what reason? Well, it was all God's plan. Anyways, so the Egyptians are going to see this thing happen and try to follow it, try to copy it, right? Well, the illustration, like was going back to Alfred Hitchcock and movies and stuff like that, we can't really see it again or even what do you call that? Recreate it. We can't recreate this. Yeah, we can't. Maybe if we really, 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 really prayed hard and at some point in our lives maybe have a vision of it, right? Did God blesses us with an illustration of what it might have been like, but we have several interpretations, and there's one that the water is like gusting, and you see like little deals. There's another one where you literally see the fish like nothing is like going on. Yeah, there's like it's like what it's like it's an aquarium, they built a wall, right? And hey, it might have been a temporary aquarium, but that's the thing, or not an aquarium. Well, anyways, so because that there's a isn't it Tulsa one of those aquariums here? Tulsa has a shark tunnel or something like that, and yeah, it's Moses. But you see right here where God's power is revealed, what He's capable of. Um, the reason that it's told here is because again, generations were wiped out that actually experienced that actually went through that. Now there's markers, there's things that they wanted to remember that by, but the again the Passover is something that came out of this, right? That he instructed them to remember that what was happening was because of God. What he was delivering his people because he was answering our prayer. He was answering our prayer because people were being oppressed, were people being mistreated. His people were not on the path that he had laid out for them. So he tried to, well, he did. He corrected it. He got them back on that path. In that same way, these are things that we can apply in similarities to our life, right? We're never going to experience. Um, that's why I think it's always important that when some preachers talk about it, that when you have that salvation experience, and you see people that maybe don't fully quite commit to that, and then or what is termed at the altar, or whatever denomination you do to you follow that solidifies that or expresses that, right? Most of us here Baptists, we see either baptism or we come up to the altar and we quote unquote give our life to the Lord. They repeat that. You see preachers when they talk about that. You see certain individuals or people groups, they keep on recommitting that, and that's not the way that God set it up. Your salvation experience is only going to happen one time, and you have to remember why He did that, why He brought you out of that situation, why He turned your life around, because it's going to be even more important later on when you're telling other people, when you're trying to show them a better way. In fact, again, going back to our tribal nature as Indian nations, as American Indian groups, right? There's one time in our life when God was rescuing us and providing for us. And we might see it in documents today, right? Treaties and all that type of stuff. But He's kept His word, right? There are some people groups that were less fortunate, that don't have customs and all that, but He's still providing for us. As a nation, there's never going to be another Independence Day. There's never going to be, what would you say? The example I can think of is recent tragic events for our nation, for our state, right? The Murrah building, as a nation, 9/11, as communities, right? The Boston Marathon, Columbine, those types of deals. There's going to be those times, but it's not going to be. And even today, we're going to see tragedies, we're going to see things, but there's never going to be another time we're going to have an opportunity to be able to say, "Hey, God, you saved me. You recognize that I was in a bad spot, and you rescued me," right? And in those certain deals that we've seen, right, or we've experienced, there's times in our lives that we can go back to and say, "You know what? Yeah, God was there." I can go back to a time when there was a lot going on in my family. I describe this to people. There was a time when there was things going on, and it wasn't a question. It was like, you know what? I'm glad God is in my life, because I wouldn't know who to turn to, because obviously my family members were leaving. I wouldn't know who to turn to help me, to guide me, to be able to lead me to these different paths that were being offered, right? I could have reverted back to things that were going on that wouldn't have been good for me. Even today, right? Stress and no, like just general hardship. What do you call them? Not hardship, but like complications, right? You might be working on something, but then something comes up. I'll give you a real quick example. I was working on a a video, and I didn't know how to do something. But there's all kinds of videos out there you can learn. Well, it wasn't clicking right away, and when I was going through, it took time, and all I could think about was, man, I wish I would have charged for this time, because it takes time to be able to learn those things. But in retrospect, right, being able to be dedicated and committed, it's the same way here, right? Being able to be dedicated and committed to that task has strengthened my character and my resolve to be able to get to the what's that called, the resolution. In the same way, we might experience things as Christians, as followers of God, but that helps strengthen our faith to be able to keep on pursuing Him, to be able to make sure at the end of the day we're following God and not following something else. whatever those teachings might be, right? And that's what God was showing the Israelites here. He was strengthening them because they were gonna face a lot more difficulty, even though they were gonna have their own land. They weren't gonna be they weren't gonna be unified forever, and in that same way, they weren't always gonna be nice neighbors. There were always gonna be neighbors that were gonna be nice to them. Even to today, that though his people are always threatened, are always um, at conflict. There was a peace. There was a time there was a little bit of peace, but then I don't know exactly what happened, but then it all broke loose, and they've literally been at war for like 60 years. There's been times of armistice. Armistice is a putting down of arms and talking, but it doesn't mean they're okay. It doesn't mean peace totally. Even today, right? We might see the the term United States, the 50 states, and but more than likely more than half of our states aren't really at peace with their neighbors because there's tax wars, there's all kinds of border things that are going on. But as a whole, we can come together and do better than a lot of other nations that have those states like that, because we still believe in God. At the end of the day, we still believe in God, and He delivered us. Even though us tribal nations, and we can term it invasion or whatever, He still delivered us from a worse life. Yeah, we're exactly. That's what I always.
Just like the Israelis, Israel, they're still there
Yep,
and they're still protected somehow.
yep. Well, it's
How do you explain that? It's
it's
God.
it's not somehow, it's God. It's His plan. As long as we stick to that plan, as long as we follow the commandments, right? Love God and love our neighbor, we're going to be taken care of. There are going to be difficult situations. There are going to be times where we fight over money, we fight over different things, and fight over resources, delicate things and delicate situations. But at the end of the day, as long as we're following God, and that's what this whole deal is about, we're going to be able to see God's power. We're going to be able to see when Jesus returned. If you really believe that, you're going to be able to see that, because He's promised us that, because He's promised us a better way, and that's what we have to share with other people. That's what we teach out of this book that they've termed this Word of God. That's what we try to be examples of, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is following Him, staying committed to Him, because that's what the Israelites were doing. They remembered at the probably a really dim glow. At the end of the day, they were like, you know what? Let's pray to God, because He can rescue us from this situation. They prayed to Him. They didn't answer Him right away, but He answered them. He answered them, and He rescued them, put them on a different path that was all for Him. And because it was all for Him, right? There wasn't anybody that was going to get in the way. So the Egyptians, they didn't want to release him. They were mad about it, and they didn't want to. They didn't want to let him go, and they were dealt with. Um, and this Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea, is a prime example, prime illustration of God's power. Not just the physical manifestation of the actual sea drying up like it was described here, and then being able to walk across it, but the actual whole situation of Him delivering His people from their oppressors. And so I thought that was really neat, the way the Bible study author pointed all that stuff out, and then likened it to something I like, right? Movie effects. You don't really get to, you see it and you don't really understand it, but it looks cool. But there's something more behind it. There's a greater power behind it. And so that's all we have for Sunday. We're gonna get started here with our main church service, and so we'll end with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you just thanking you again for everything that you've done, everything you've allowed us to see. Thank you for the study this morning. We ask that you just help us. We ask that you just watch over service as we get ready, and watch over us the rest of this day. Be with those that may be on their way, and maybe be with those that may be tuning in. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.